the war on drugs. She's currently pursuing her Doctor of Pharmacy degree from Hyderabad, India. How do you correct?
Hyderabad.
Hyderabad, okay. She is the first female chair of the executive board at the South Asia Student for Liberty, where she initially found her love for liberty. Okay.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank all the organizers and Lee and Ken for having me here. My talk is going to be about a little bit about the history of how the drug war started, and then a little into what Students for Liberty is doing about it. Activities and products prohibited by law lead to prohibition, and drugs are not new to it. Established in 1961 to 1971 and 1988, the UN drew the drug war into domestic law of over 150 countries. It started with President Nixon from USA. And drugs have always been a part of society, and now the supply and demand of drugs saw a different route. The perception of the drug war was that supply of drugs was an enemy to the US. The drugs entered the US. It's always been there, and everyone has always used it. But how did they become a problem? It was not the drugs being used as a problem, as to who was using the drugs. Starting with Chinese immigrants that were using opium, led to the prohibition of opium, followed by cocaine, which was through the blacks. Raised fear of blacks, thinking that men using cocaine, black men using cocaine, would lead them to forgetting their place in society, led to the banning of cocaine, followed by marijuana, which was brought in with the fear of Mexican migrants. The origin of the war on drugs and its implementation has been varied. The origin was for safety of drugs, and the implementation was as to who was using it. Here is President Nixon and his drug policy chief, who said, "We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or blacks. But by getting public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt these communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and willy them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did." Is legal regulation of drugs the way forward? I'm not sure right now. But it is definitely what's brighter than criminalizing drugs. When you criminalize drugs, you lead to disruption of homes and increase incarcerations. And what has been the outcome of the drug war that has been run for 50 years, almost a decade? It has cost more than $1.5 trillion over half a century. Yet, addiction rates have not budged. Wastes limited law enforcement resources, with more than 1.2 million arrests made annually for simple drug possessions. In countries like Philippines, police uses this war to barge into people's homes and shoot them. A tool for institutionalized racism. And this is inhumane. It leads to broken families, torture detention practices. It deprives the desperately ill of treatment options. Mass incarceration and racial disparities. These two graphs show you that the world incarceration rates have been the highest in the US, and so on. The disproportionate impact of drug laws on Black and Latino communities. Even though the US population has a 60% of white, the people in federal prison for drug offenses are usually Black and Latinos. What has been the outcome? The war on drugs is to a significant degree a war on people. How do we combat this drug war? The most rational solution that I could come up with was this. Prohibition leads to unregulated criminal market. An unregulated legal market leads to unrestricted access to drugs. Different drugs with different categories of regulation can be formed into decriminalization and harm reduction of drugs, responsible drug regulation, and light regulation of drugs. This is based on how the drugs are categorized. What happens when we control the drugs? The markets that are underground come overground. It minimizes the harm of drugs and better prohibition. We can have more legal regulation. This can be seen with examples of countries who have legalized drugs. For example, in Portugal, there's no jail time for drugs. Instead, they use these resources for treating addicts. Similar in Germany, Switzerland, and Netherlands. The results have been reduce in illegal drug use, reduce in crime rates. In New Zealand, legalization of drugs has come up with safety parameters. Similarly in Brazil and Peru, where cocaine can be given OTC, over the counter. Combating the drug war. Here are a few ways that we can combat the drug war. Protect and improve public health. Prohibition creates health harms. Regulation will protect it. Reduce drug-related crime, corruption, and violence. Prohibition creates crime and criminals. Protect human rights. The war on drugs leads to direct and indirect human right abuses. A little bit about Students for Liberty and the Drug War campaign. Established in September 2014, Students for Liberty started a global campaign aimed to end the inefficient, tragic war on drugs. End the Drug War is a single-issue campaign produced and delivered by Students for Liberty and supported by partners to raise awareness about the failed drug war, to show policymakers all over the world that millennial generation is united against the violence, waste, corruption, and curtailment of freedom perpetuated by the drug war. The activities that SFL organizes varies from panel discussion, harm reduction and education trainings, discussions in local areas, blogging, YouTube, media appearances, movie screenings, and end the drug war activisms and trainings. An example of this is in Georgia, where we started Do Not Arrest campaign. Here is marijuana decriminalization protest in Tbilisi in 2015, where the protesters chanted Do Not Arrest. Here is our local coordinator, Miriam, speaking on Do Not Arrest movement on the local TV show. Another example is Belarus, civic campaign that was launched in 2017 by SFL Belarus as a reaction against extreme inhumane drug policy in the most authoritarian country in Europe. Since then, activists organized 30 public events, got over 250 media hits in local, national, and international media. For their activities, they were several times arrested. One of our coordinators has spent time in jail for campaigning against the drug war. Here is a picture of a protest for decriminalization of small amounts of controlled substances in Belarus from 2018. Here was a lecture conducted on economic benefits of cannabis legalization. We are a global movement. We are present in Canada, in Latin America, and Africa. A new project that SFL is venturing into is a drug policy index. The drug policy index aims to reduce harmful regulation on drugs, drug clinical trials, post-marketing surveillance, and the war on drugs through effective identification of the causative factors of harmful consumer policies and advocating for change in current FDA and EU regulations. The vision of this policy index is aim to create a free, accessible, and open medication system in healthcare by harm reduction to the consumer. and the mission is to advocate for drug policies, regulation reforms through research, research-based index, and education on health rights for the consumer. This is the end of the Drug War campaign by SFL. Thank you.